What's up, guys? Welcome back to FishOfHex. Today we're going to start a new series and kind of see how you guys like it. It's going to be a weekly email Q&A, and I did take some emails that you guys submitted over the last week or so, as well as some questions in the comment section to kind of fill in some gaps here for the video. Now, right now I have about 21 questions. I'm going to try to answer them as quickly as possible, so enjoy the view of the 300-gallon. I might do some 30-gallon on here as well, and maybe some frag tank stuff, but we'll see. I hope you guys enjoy the video, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first question here is, after doing water changes when using copper in a quarantine system, and when you do those water changes, do you replace the copper that was taken out? And also, how long do I keep my fish exposed to copper? Now, when it comes to tanks like the quarantine tank for the hippo tang, which is a bigger fish, I tend to do a water change probably every week or every 2 weeks, depending on how the water is looking and the ammonia level in the tank. And say I do a 50% water change, I'll go ahead and replace the copper that was removed from that. Of course, I am testing my copper with the API test kit, but that's just, it's not the most accurate test kit, so I tend to underdose my copper opposed to overdosing it or taking that risk. So when I do a water change of 50%, I will redose approximately 50% of the copper in that tank, or that was already dosed. And once the tank has been exposed, or the fish has been exposed to the full duration of copper, which is about 2 weeks, I'll go ahead and do a 50% water change and keep the fish in some sort of concentration of copper for the remainder of its quarantine period. It is a less amount, just in case something was to pop up. Maybe it didn't get totally taken care of during that 2 week period, but keeping it exposed for the remainder of quarantine is always something that I do that helps prevent that whoops or maybe of the egg parasite. All right, the next question is, do you know what kind of refugium light is on my sump? I know that I get it from geosreef.com, but where does he get them? I believe he said that he does get them from reefbright.com, and if you can't get them through that, definitely check out bulkreefsupply.com. I do believe they sell the same type of light. Now, it is going to be the 3K and the 5K spectrum mixed on there, and it definitely does grow macroalgae. Okay, the next question, do you recommend using AcroPower with Red Sea A, B, C, and D? Yes, you can definitely use AcroPower with that. Now, I would stay away from Fuel and Reef Plus because those are adding minor elements which you're already dosing through the Red Sea program there. Now, this is an awesome program. I used it on the 125 and it works great, especially when you're two-part dosing. Now, I know somebody in the comment section a while ago said that they could do the calculation with a calcium reactor to determine how much you can dose with that program. I haven't bothered looking into that since I'm using other products. All right, so the next question here, maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear how high you had the radians over the water on the 300-gallon tank for those par numbers. Now, one thing to know here, there are 8 radians over the system, and they're sitting at about 7 inches in those T5 retrofit kits. Now, it's recommended about 7 inches or a little bit higher. I think it's between 7 and 12. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what they were talking about in the manual. But it is going to depend on what type of tank you have, what type of coral you want to grow, also how big the system is and how many radians you have. So there's going to be different circumstances for each one. But you know, test it out. You know, if you want to get a certain amount of coverage, bring it up a little bit higher if you want that spread. If you're looking to focus it on a specific rock, or scape or something like that, you can go ahead and lower it down. But I would say 7 inches is pretty safe. That way you're not getting water into the unit as well. All right, so next question here. Did you notice any changes to any LPS or Ophelia by chance with AcroPower? No, I didn't notice anything different. It looked as normal. I don't really have a lot in the tank to kind of go by. And to be completely honest with you, I don't really focus on the LPS in the tank. I'm more the acro. That's where it gets my attention, as well as some of the other SPS. So I really didn't do any before and afters on the LPS, but I could just by quick glance, there really hasn't been any changes that I've noticed. All right, next question here. Do you think that AcroPower can fuel existing algae? I don't think so. I haven't had any problems with that, and there are several people in the hobby that I know that run AcroPower, and they've yet to have any kind of algae issues or anything like that. Now, there is a product, that fuel, the Aquavitro fuel, that might be another story because of the polyunsaturated fatty acids and some of the nutrients that they are supplementing the tank for coral growth. I do know people that use that product that end up getting an algae outbreak shortly after using it, but I haven't seen anything with AcroPower. All right, so the next question here is, I want to do my coral stock in 2 rounds of quarantine. Is this possible? The answer is yes. You can definitely do it, but there are a few things you want to take in consideration. Depending on the type of coral you have, say you want to quarantine a bunch of SPS. Now, if you're going to do that in a smaller system like a 20-gallon high, you're going to want to monitor the alkalinity and calcium closely, just to make sure there's no fluctuations that will cause unnecessary stress to the coral. Another thing you want to think about is if you're mixing Ophelia or corals like Hollywood stunner chalice that have those big sweeper tentacles that could do a lot of damage if they start hitting SPS or they start touching somebody that doesn't necessarily like it. You could do a lot of damage and kill off a lot of coral pretty quickly in just one night of not monitoring that. So just take that into consideration. But yes, you can definitely quarantine as much coral as you want given the tank size and what type of corals you plan on putting in there. All right, so the next question here is, hey, what's up? I'm new to saltwater. I just set up a 13.5 gallon and I have a pair of black and white clownfish. I've been running for about a week now. When do I know when it's cycled and I can add a cleanup crew? Well, a couple things on that. First thing, you shouldn't have added the fish just yet. I mean, you've added them too early. You can't take it back now, so just kind of we're going to have to adjust our process here. Ideally, you want to cycle the tank before you add your fish. That way you don't have the ammonia spike that causes stress and burns the gills of the fish and potentially kills them down the road depending on how high that spike gets. Now, because it is such a smaller tank, at this point, I'd recommend you do weekly water changes of at least 50%. To kind of compensate while the bacteria is building up in the tank. Now, what you also want to do is get yourself the API test kit. You can get it at Petco. And you want to test ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates. Now, what's going to happen over time is you're not going to see any nitrates right away until the bacteria builds up. So there's 2 types of bacteria. The first one's going to build up, which breaks down ammonia to nitrites. Then there's a secondary bacteria that eats the nitrites and turns them into nitrates. So make sure to mix that up. And so once you see no ammonia, no nitrites, and just the nitrates, that means the tank is cycled. Now, it's going to depend on how stocked the tank is, how much biological filtration via rock that you have. I mean, it sounds like a decent sized tank and you have, plenty of fish in there. I wouldn't add any more anytime soon. But again, once you have just nitrates, you're good to go ahead and add your cleanup crew. But I would also recommend you do those water changes at least once per week, and then watch how much you're feeding. Maybe feed every other day. They don't need to eat every single day, at least until the tank is cycled. All right, so the next question is about that eShops hang on a back skimmer I did a video on last week. And to pretty much sum up the question, it says, does the output of the skimmer have to be submerged underneath water in order for the skimmer to work? Mine is not submerged on the back of that 30-gallon Nuble, and it works just fine. As long as you have the input underneath enough water, you should be totally fine. And I know that this guy is using a BioCube, so you're just going to have water splashing down the middle section there. As long as that doesn't irritate you, you should be fine, and it should work as normal. All right, so the next email has 3 questions in it. The first one is, how long do I cycle my quarantine tank if I am using all new equipment? Well, if you're using all new equipment, you could definitely get yourself some beneficial bacteria to put in the quarantine tank. I don't really know what kind of equipment you're using, if you're using a hang on a back or a sponge filter, but it definitely benefits to put some bacteria in there to help speed up the process because it will give you the nitrifying bacteria right away. I think it's Biospira. I want to say that's the name of it. Or you can go ahead and just fill it up with salt water, put a little bit of fish food in there, some flake food in there, and let it sit for 2 or 3 weeks, and then that process will take care of the beneficial bacteria. It's up to you, whatever route you want to go. Of course, if you go the bacteria route, you'll be able to add fish sooner, but if you just want to take the natural approach, it'll take a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. The next question is, if I have one fish in QT for a while, and if I am going to add a new one, should I move the old one to the display tank or just add the new fish straight away? Well, if you buy one fish and it's only been in quarantine for a couple weeks and you plan on adding a new one, you definitely do not want to take the old fish and put it in the main display because it hasn't gone through the proper quarantine time of 4 or 5 weeks with either hypo or copper in the system one way or another to rid it of parasites and all that kind of stuff. So the last thing you want to do is throw a fish in and cut its quarantine short. You don't want to do any of that stuff. What you can do is add the new fish and then start the quarantine period over completely. Just start it over from fresh. Obviously, you don't want to redose copper if it's already in the system, but you definitely want to just add the new fish and reset your calendar for another 4 or 5 weeks. And the last question in that email is, then how to move my fishies from quarantine to display tank? What is the best method? Now, what I like to do is I try to keep my quarantine tank and my display tank within the same temperature range as well as the same salinity range. So that transition is going to be a lot easier. But of course, you're going to want to use your designated quarantine bucket, which is probably marked with copper on the side of it, which you don't mix with any other equipment. And then just go ahead and drip water or put cups of water from your main display in that bucket for at least 20 or 30 minutes and then transition the fish over. Now be aware that you don't want to use any nets that you are in quarantine or you're using them with copper all the time. You don't want to put those nets in your main display. So it depends on the fish. If it's a tang, I wouldn't pick it up by hand unless you're experienced with that. You want to avoid getting stabbed by the fin. But what I like to do is just kind of reach in the bucket, cup the fish, and make sure that they're good to put in the tank. Now if you're worried about any trace copper, you can always take another container of just water from the main display. And then once you're done acclimating in the original container, you could put that fish in there just to kind of rinse off any copper that might be on them and then transition them into the main display. It's your call, but that's what I like to do here in the fish room. All right, so the next question is on the same lines with quarantine, and I appreciate you guys asking a lot of questions about quarantining. It just shows that you're interested in doing it, which is a big deal here in the hobby. You guys know that I talk a lot about quarantine, and it's very important to me, and it's for the benefit of you and your pets, trust me. So I appreciate those questions. Now this one is, do you quarantine your invertebrates and or macroalgae, and if so, how long? Macroalgae, no, I don't quarantine a macroalgae. I usually take the macroalgae and put it underneath the light. I dip it in fresh water because you're not going to kill it by putting it in fresh water, but I put it in there for a little bit, mix it around, get any kind of little worms that might be in there, anything that I just don't like, I remove from it. If maybe there's might be aptasia in there or something, there might be something in the macroalgae, and I inspect it underneath the light to see what's on it because macroalgae is really easy to detect pests and stuff like that. And again, fresh water, I take care of that. But when it comes to inverts, I quarantine everything that touches my 300 gallon. The inverts will get a 30 to 45 day quarantine period. No way around it. I don't take any chances because there's some snails that come in with baby aptasia. You won't see it. They come in with other pests, flatworms, anything could be in the shell, and it's just not worth the risk, at least not for me and at the point that or at least with the build that I currently have. You might not care on your end, but all inverts will get quarantined one way or another. All right, so the next question here is, I have some mix of corals, but I left them on the plug. Do they encrust easier and faster if I use putty and put them on the rocks? It's going to depend on the coral when it comes to the whole plug removal situation. If you can easily remove the plug, do that every single time because you're going to take the chances of getting certain pests, certain types of maybe aptasia or red bugs, something like that. You're gonna be able to catch those on the plugs early, and by removing the plug, you kind of avoid adding them to the tank, or at least preventing them for the most part. Now, there's going to be some corals that encrust, like SPS, that get on the plug. Now, what I like to do is go ahead and cut off with bone cutters as much of the plug as I can around where the SPS was encrusted, as well as the little plug nipple, whatever you want to call it, on the bottom there, the base. I cut that off as well, and then I epoxy it or super glue it to the rock structure, which in turn it will continually encrust over onto the rock, hiding the plug. Now, that's what I recommend you do, and they grow the same rate regardless if they're on the rock or they're on the plug. It doesn't matter, but I would definitely remove any and all plugs if you can safely without damaging the coral, just to prevent any kind of pests from getting in the tank or taking one step further in preventing them. All right, so we're getting to the end of the video here. I have a few more questions. This one is, do you know any ways of cooling down a tank without using a fan or chiller? I had to leave the country and had my parents take care of my tank, and the heat wave hit and they couldn't save my livestock because of the overheating. Now, I talked about this in a few videos, I think probably a few months ago. I don't necessarily remember when I put them up, but I definitely talked about it before, and it's going to be heat management. So when it comes to dealing with that, you have to take in consideration, of course, where you live. Do you have central air? What happens if the power goes off? These are all things you got to think about. But on a quick notice, I always like to use frozen 2-liter bottles of water. I just keep them in the freezer, and if something happens, I can plop those in the tank. They'll float. They'll help chill down the tank. Now, given if you have a 300, 400 gallon system, some bottles of water are just not going to do anything. If you have a small tank like a nano or 30 or 40 gallon, a 2-liter bottle of frozen water will definitely help in keeping that level down. So you're gonna have to take that into consideration. But for long-term success, I definitely recommend either putting fans on the tank and or having a chiller. So if you're in a climate that is known to getting really hot or having power outages, that kind of stuff, having a chiller, having a generator, all those things will save your tank in the future. All right, so the next question here is, I have two small colonies of zoas next to each other on a rock. The smaller colony is glued to the rock and opens wonderfully. The second colony is attached to a frag plug, bought it about a week ago, and only one head opens. My nitrates are close to 0, never over 3. My phosphates are usually 0 based on the Salifert test kit. Do you have any idea what may be causing this? Now, there could be a couple things. You could have, maybe it doesn't like the flow. Depending on the tank that it came out of, it might not like the flow, it might not like the lighting. It will take time for some corals to adjust to your tank, so I would give it a little bit longer before you decide to move it or fiddle with it. Now, my next thing is, maybe there's a pest. Maybe there's a spider in there or a nudibranch. Did you dip your coral? Did you quarantine your coral? Those are kind of things you want to take in consideration as well. What I would do is closely look at it, see if you see any pests. If the polyps are closed up, you're going to find the nudies. You're at least going to see the eggs, and you're going to see the spiders. You're going to find those things if they're present. Also, look at the colony when the lights are off. Get a flashlight, look at the tank about 4 or 5 hours after the lights go off. You'll see anything that is potentially irritating that coral. They will come out at night and continue to do that. Another thing is, maybe there's some algae in there or something and you have hermit crabs that are picking at it. Just monitor it closely and kind of see what happens. Now, basically, if it doesn't open up, if you don't see any pests or anything like that, and it doesn't open up in about a week or two longer after adjusting to your tank, try it at another location. Maybe it likes different flow. All corals react differently to different tanks. So good luck with that. All right, so last couple questions here. When are we going to get a full video of you using the gravel vac to get your clowns to host the anemone? Now, if you guys follow me on Instagram, I posted some videos and stuff of me working with the anemones and the clownfish. And yeah, so hopefully you guys will see that video next week. At least that is the plan. Now, this isn't a new concept. There's a lot of people doing this here, not only on YouTube and stuff like that. I think Milev's Reef, I don't know if I pronounced that right. I think he did it originally. So I've got to give credit where credit's due. But the concept works. Basically, you hold the clownfish over the body of the anemone, and then they flow into it. They get used to getting stung, and then hopefully they stay. And luckily for me, they did. So yeah, you guys will see that video next week. Now the next question here is, when are we going to get another rambling video? I'm falling behind schedule. Yes, I'm definitely falling behind schedule on that. I'm hopefully get one out this week or early next week, so stay tuned for that. Now, the final question here is, I've always wondered about your military background. Both of my parents are in the service, and I might join as well. So please tell me some of your background. All right, well, I joined the military fresh out of high school, and I was deployed to Afghanistan at 20 years old, spent my 21st birthday there. I'm now 31. Jeez, am I 30? Yeah, I'm 31. 31 or 32. I'm probably closer to 32. You just lose track after a few years. But yeah, so the experience was interesting. Part of the reason why I started the Reef Tanks for Veterans program is to help people with post-traumatic stress disorder, including myself. Yeah, it's a struggle. I would say if you're going to join, get a job that you really like. Do everything you can do. Take as many extra classes and courses as you can to be successful. And yeah, keep your head down. But yeah, that's about it on my end. Well, guys, if you guys like this video or this series, let me know. Put it in the comment section below, and or give the video a thumbs up. And that way I know you guys like it, and I will make some more. So if you guys want to be part of this conversation or this video series, definitely email me at fishofhex@gmail.com with your questions. And if you want to put the question in the comment section, you're just taking a risk of me not seeing it and being able to answer it. So just keep that in mind. All right, guys. So until probably tomorrow, I'll have another video out, and see you then. All right. Peace.